add and take this opportunity to tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Very good. So my name is Lawrence Hunter. I'm a retired police captain from the city of Waterbury in Connecticut. I was there for 24 years. 19 of those 24 years, I was in supervisory capacity, sergeant, first line supervisor, manager, being a lieutenant, and then commander as a captain. I was a member of my command staff. I retired in good standings a few years ago. I started a consulting business, LMH Consulting Services, LLC. I currently teach at a college. I was teaching at a couple of colleges before. It's down to one here, a local college here in Connecticut. I have done some expert testimony work, talking about use of force in other cases as well. So I'm branching out my services. During my time as a police officer, I taught implicit bias. I taught human behavior, which is essentially psychology. I taught defensive tactics, which is the use of force and when officers can use force, what type of force they can use, how much force, and I taught them how to use those, how to apply joint locks and how to strike and where to strike and how to take persons into custody. I also taught handcuffing as well. So all this type of use of force training makes me an expert in this particular field. So I think I'll leave it there as far as that's my training, it's my background. I went back to school, got a couple of degrees. But that's essentially where I'm at right now.
All right, well, thanks very much for that wrap on who we're talking to today. So if I wanted to discuss laws around this case, I would invite a lawyer to come and talk about it and explain the nuts and bolts of the law. Them explaining the laws should not be misunderstood to be them defending or justifying those laws. If the laws are horrible, then the lawyer will simply be explaining horrible laws, and anyone listening should not take away the idea that the person explaining it necessarily agrees with it. Just as you explaining the nuts and bolts of what you see when you view the video as someone who understands policing in the US from inside the organization does not necessarily mean that you condone the training or the policies that drive the police response. In fact, you are in favor of reform. So I would assume that to some degree, there's going to be times when you disagree with like the standard of policing as it is, because otherwise what would be the point of reforming it? So I've invited you on because you understand it, you can explain it. I understand that it doesn't mean that you're necessarily placing a judgment on it or condoning it. Do you have anything that you'd like to add to that?
Well, let me add this. I do appreciate the fact that you mentioned the part about the lawyer coming in to explain the laws, and to the question of why would you have a cop on? I think that, if we were talking about forest fires in California, then you'd want to have a firefighter on, right? If we were talking about bad teachers who are sleeping with students, then you want to have a good teacher, retired teacher, principal, et cetera, to explain what should happen and how these things should go forward. And so I appreciate the fact that you're standing strong in this conviction that, just because one police officer, or just because one police officer does something bad, that you should, and everyone should have good officers on, retired police officers, to talk about what should be done and look at the scope of the training, right? And so I appreciate that, and I thank you for doing that.
Okay, yeah, and I understand that. I would say that, some of these interactions are a little bit more politically charged than a forest fire, right? So I do understand why some folks see it from a perspective of social justice, which isn't going to enter into something generally like firefighting. So when you have a situation,
the point is that you need experts on, and because someone walked in that field doesn't mean that there is inherent corruption within the whole system. There are good police officers, excellent police officers who do their job, who save lives, who care about the community. And just because they put the badge on the uniform on doesn't mean that they are a part of that so-called blue thin line, blue wall, et cetera. That is what I'm applauding you on, and that is what I want to emphasize to those who would say, "Why would you have a cop on?" Because there are people, and I understand the political charge. I understand that there's a skepticism. I get it. I get it. It's why I wrote a book. I get it that it's there, but that doesn't mean that we're all always going to back each other. We're all going to stand by. It takes courage to stand up and do what I'm doing, do what other officers are doing, speaking out and speaking loudly that some things have not been right and some things need to change.
I wanted to start out with kind of a weird, I wanted to start with kind of a hypothetical scenario that is different than what we witnessed with Lyoya. I envision, for example, a group of protesters that are chained to a gate and they're blocking passage. And an officer is instructed to get them to move and comes up to them and says they need to unchain themselves, and they refuse. So they refuse to comply, and they put up what I would consider passive resistance, right? So they're not attacking the officer, but they are saying, we refuse to comply. We're not going to unlock this chain from the gate. We're not going to stop blocking the entry. If they cover the chain with their body so that it can't be cut, and they refuse to move, that would also be passive resistance. Again, they're not aggressing toward or trying to harm the officer, but they are using force to resist the police unchaining them. So if a cop then tries to tase them into compliance, and they place a hand on the taser and push it so that it's aiming at the ground rather than at them, when I'm seeing that, what I believe I'm viewing is a defensive move rather than an aggressive move. It isn't trying to take the taser and shoot the officer with the taser. It's just trying to keep themselves from being shot. Defensive moves, like trying to push the weapon away, aren't even really often anything we think about. It's just instinctive to not want to have a weapon aimed at you and to try and redirect that aim. I know that this is a completely separate situation, but do you have any objections to what I just described?
So I think that the important thing to understand is that it's going to come down to state laws, departmental policies and procedure, and how they define aggression, passive resistance, active resistance. So these are things that are usually defined within their policies. And this is something that law enforcement within the last 5 to 10 years, probably since since 2014 with the Michael Brown, when that whole summer was blowing up, Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin, etc. So we're looking at what is active resistance, what is passive resistance, what is aggression, and what is fighting words, and what is fighting, and all these different definitions. We're wrestling with these terms, and so as a result of many viral videos, police officers in departments are getting away from using tasers and pepper spray for persons who are engaging in active or in passive resistance, as the scenario that you just laid out. So if one is engaging in passive resistance, laying on the chain, landing on the ground, locking arms, and not aggressing towards the officer, then many departments are now saying you cannot OC spray them, or the residents in capsicum, if I'm saying that right, OC spray, which is pepper spray, and or they are saying that you can't tase them in those situations. So now the situation in the scenario changes from the passive resistance to now where the person is now deflecting the arm, the hand of the officer in a defensive measure. Well, that is aggression. It may not be the type where they're trying to actually harm the officer, but that act of deflecting and the supposedly state sanctioned use of force, because the state has reserved the use of force for themselves. The state, the government, the county, city, whatever, has regulated the use of force for themselves and or individual persons when they're in defense of their own self. So when they now go from the act of sitting there with the arms locked, laying on a chain, whatever, to now actually aggressing and pushing an officer's hand away, as long as the officer's use of force is justified, again, state laws, if it's departmental policies, procedure, can they use pepper spray? Can they not? Can they use OCs? Can they use taser or not? If what they're doing is justified and they're pushing it away, then that in and of itself is in more than likely in most jurisdictions called a resisting arrest, and you can't do. So I hope that distinction is clear. It's really going to come down to state law and departmental policies and procedures and what they say and how individuals can respond.
Okay. And I understand what you're saying. I guess what I just want to, would you agree that despite, I understand what you're saying, that this is not considered legal to resist the police officer, that would be a violation. But do you agree that in a moment, a person will sometimes instinctively react just to defend themselves?
I agree with that.
Okay.
I certainly agree.
Even though
I certainly agree.
Yeah, even though the officer has the right to do what he's doing and he's justified in his action, sometimes a person isn't even trying to escalate a thing. You aim a weapon at them and they just instinctively push it away or try to block it. So it's not an unreasonable action to take, although it may be an illegal action to take.
I will give you that it's not unreasonable from a self-preservation safety point of view, that someone's pointing a weapon at you, etc., and that therefore it is maybe a responsive, reflective type of thing to say, get this away from me.
Exactly.
I go to the doctor for the eye doctor, and I cannot stand having eye drops put in my eyes. I know that this is something that's necessary, but it's my natural reaction to keep things away from my eyes. So I close my eyes, I turn my head, and the doctor's always telling me, listen, Lawrence, you gotta let us put these eye drops in. So I get it, but we hope that we can fight through that and allow the correct action to take place. But right. Yes, from a self-preservation standpoint, I understand what you're saying.
Okay. And the other thing is that understanding what we both agree that, sometimes a person will do this, just like sometimes you will look away and the doctor has to tell you, you have to keep your head still. Those actions, when they don't go beyond the defensive push away of the weapon, would not normally, I would think, be considered threatening.
Normally. So this brings us into the really the heart of the conversation, right? So we pay our police officers to do a job, and that is to take suspects into custody. And so generally, and I'm going to speak generally, when a police officer is engaged in the exact scenario that you laid out before, they are allowed by law in most states, I'm assuming, that they can use one level, if I can use that terminology, one level above the force that is necessary in order to effect the arrest or to accomplish the lawful purpose of what's going on, right? Lawful purpose. So in the scenario you raised out, you raised someone pushes the hand away from their body because they don't want to be tased or sprayed. Now, the police have a lawful purpose that they need to accomplish, whether it's taking that person into custody or helping a paramedic to administer drugs to calm a person down, whatever it is. And so therefore they are allowed to use one level above a force to accomplish that goal. So again, if they're pushing, now the officer will raise his level of assertiveness, sometimes maybe even use the word aggression, use of force in order to accomplish that goal. So you push my hand away, now I'm going to take my level up. I'm not going to push your hand away, right? I have to effect this arrest. I have to accomplish this goal. So now you push my hand away. Now I have to step my game up in order to accomplish that purpose, and that goal. And so that becomes the question as to this situation of Lyoya. I'm going to call him Patrick because I'm going to be able to pronounce his name. So that becomes his scenario. It becomes a situation in which you laid out with the persons who are acting in passive resistance initially. Again, as I said, it started off as passive. Once you push the hand away, now it's active resistance, and now the officer has the responsibility and the legal authority to take his level of use of force up a notch.
Okay. But probably shooting someone would be a little extreme at that level.
I'm not going to disagree with that.
Okay.
I'm not going to disagree.
All right. I just want to make sure we're I guess I'm checking myself every step of the way, sort of making sure.
Yes. So there's there's tiers, there's levels to the use of force, right? So pushing your hand away might require an arm bar by the police officer. If you're actively pushing, then the officer may turn to a strike with his hand and or his or her baton in order to accomplish that, right? So there's levels that you can that they should be progressing to. Now, just because they start off at one level doesn't mean that you have to necessarily go to the next level, right? If you start off, if you go from pushing my hand away to next thing you know, you take out a knife. Well, I don't have to now go to an arm bar. I can now go to the use of lethal force with a gun. So I'm just trying to say that officers are allowed to skip, jump to higher levels and or de-escalate to lower levels as well. So I am in agreement with you that going to the gun initially is a bad idea, and probably more than likely should not happen in most cases.
Okay. So next, I'd like to shift the conversation to the specific case that we're seeing in the news now, which is Patrick Lyoya. This happened in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and it started out when an officer ran a routine license plate check, which is a misdemeanor traffic stop. And so my question is, why do police run a routine license plate check?
There may be a number of reasons why a police officer runs a so-called routine license check. If the license plate looks funny to a police officer, what does look funny mean? It means that you have a completely clean car and a dirty license plate. That would suggest that the license plate does not belong in that car. It can be the exact opposite, where the car is clean, maybe the car is completely dirty and the license plate is clean. Okay, so that looks funny to a police officer. Maybe there was other situations where the license plate is hanging at an angle, not really securely fastened on. Maybe there was a be on the lookout or a bolo for ABCD 1 2 3. Maybe that's the license plate. Well, maybe the officer couldn't remember. Maybe it was just he got the A and the B and the last number was 4. Okay, maybe that may be the plate. So there's so he's running for that. Maybe the person ran a red light, ran a stop sign, maybe appearing to be driving too fast, going 40 miles in a 25-mile-an-hour zone, things along those lines. So there's a myriad of reasons why a police officer could run a license plate. Hopefully those are legitimate reasons and not the illegitimate reasons, such as seeing a black person in a white neighborhood or a white person in a black neighborhood. But absent those things, I've given you legitimate reasons why a police officer can run a person's license plate.
So when I actually Googled this, what I found is that an officer is within their rights to just randomly run a license check. And apparently that is tied to a court case that says since your license plate is in public view, it can be run. But I'm just saying that this was according this was on a legal site that I found that was talking about routine license checks that basically just said that an officer can run random checks.
Yes. So I don't know what court case that it is, but I don't know of any Supreme Court case and or circuit court case, right? Those are the court cases that we go on. Higher circuit court cases, right? I don't know, I believe in Texas or Connecticut. So there's circuit court cases where these challenges come up, and I don't know of any case where the circuit courts and or the Supreme Court has said police officers can't do it. And so, yeah, essentially you can rent it for no reason at all. I'm not going to disagree with that. I try to give you legitimate reasons,
Sure.
because I always want to be able to explain to someone why I read your plate. If I ran your plate and something came back a miss, I want to go up to the car and say, this is why I did it. I don't think that, and I think that when there's not a reason, then it can lead to abuses. You don't want male police officers running the plates of pretty young females. We don't want them doing that. So I try to give legitimate reasons, but absent anything like that, then they should not. Well, I can't say that they should not, but it can be done. There's no prohibition against it.
Right, and that I think was something that was interesting to me. So what this site was saying is that a police officer can just randomly run a license check on any vehicle, even if you haven't broken any laws, because the plates are in public view. But it is completely illegal for a cop to run somebody's plate because of race. So as you said earlier, I can't just, as a police officer, see a black man driving a car and say, let me run your tag because I see a black man driving a car and I want to harass this black person driving. So
Right.
if a cop does run the plate based on race, it's up to the person whose plate was run to prove that. And I guess my
Right.
thinking on that is good luck, right? Because if a cop has the discretion to run anybody's tag without an explanation, like you were offering an explanation and you said that you think it's good, best practice to have an explanation, to be able to say, I saw the plate, it looked like this, it seemed a little suspect, and that's why I ran it. And I understand why you're saying that, because you're basically saying I should be able to justify why I'm running a citizen's plate. And when I do go in to talk about this, if somebody did complain, I would be able to explain why I did it. But in fact, you're not required to explain why you did it. It's up to the citizen to prove you did it for an illegitimate reason.
Well, yes, that is essentially the case. It is up to them to be able to prove to prove why you did it. And so I think that one other thing that would come into play is an officer's past history. If they have a routine of running individuals' plates who are black, whatever, black, young, pretty females, whatever, then that would be suspect. And so that would lend to the proof of the driver and saying, listen, this is part of a pattern of practice of this officer's behavior. And I think that supervisors, it is incumbent upon the supervisors to know what their officers are doing and know why they're doing it. Ask them, why are you doing these types of things? And that's a good supervisory practice to ask, okay, well, listen, we noticed that you're running these plates, you're running them and not pulling them over, you just running plates. What's going on here? And even if there's no disciplinary action that would be taken at that time, it should sink into to the officer's mind. These people are watching me. My supervisor's watching me, so I better be on my P's and Q's. So
If a cop does run a plate, though, would there be any record of the race of the driver?
There would be a record of who owns the vehicle, and from there you can get the race, you can get the age, and things along those lines. If the system, NCIC or the Department of Motor Vehicles in that particular state, would record the race of the driver, then they would know. But again, that would be on the system and the national collect system, national databases, and things along those lines. So
But
it
this
could
would be
be.
this would be a heck of a heavy lift for a citizen.
Well, it would be. I'm not going to doubt
Okay.
that. But again, so let's just go down this road. So I pull someone over and they say, well, listen, officer, why did you do it? And I say, well, I just kind of just ran your plate just because I saw you driving down the street. So officer, can you do that? Yeah, I can do that. So unless you have any type of, unless a citizen has anything to refute the officer's word of mouth, his justification and or lack of justification, yeah, it's a heavy lift. There's no doubt about that. There's no doubt about that.
I think my takeaway was under the law, a cop can't run your plate based on your race, but in reality, pretty much they can.
Well, again, you'd have to, I would then, if I were in that situation, I would ask for the officer's name, his badge number in a polite way. And maybe if you think that you've been targeted along those lines, to look into the officer's history and have, you know, you can file a complaint and say, and just ask and say, hey, listen, can you all your internal affairs, which I was, I neglected to mention this, but I was over my internal affairs for a while. Can you look into this officer because I think he's profiling people, and from there they can check and see, and there is a record of whose plate he's running, what time he's running it, and things along those lines. So it can be tracked down, and a good department will look into those types of things.
Okay. I do want to get a little bit into the specifics of the case, but I do want to also note that I don't want to fall into, and this is not really tied to you so much as to me, like a reminder for myself and also to my audience, that I don't want to get too tied into specifics of a case, even though I want to talk about it, because I feel like when we're looking at racism in policing, where it really shows up is in statistics, not necessarily in individual cases. So I do agree that you can have an individual case that is so overt as to be unquestionably problematic. And I think when you and I talked about George Floyd, at least the impression I got from your side of that conversation was that you felt that that was one of those cases where, whether it was racism or not, it was an egregious use of force and should not have happened. So you were at least, you know, of the opinion that this is pretty straightforward abuse of authority here. And so but even a situation like that, it becomes difficult to say, is this just an abusive cop? Is this a cop with, you know, racism in his head? Proving what's in someone's head is extremely difficult if they don't just say it outright. And so what happens is you have this discretion, like we were just talking about with the license plate running, where if you were to go up a chain and see statistics, and I'm not claiming that this is a stat, but there are stats like this. When you go up the chain and you start to look at statistics of when is force used, when is lethal force used, when is a shooting, you know, involved, when is an unarmed suspect killed, you start to see these racial trends. That's where the racism starts to come out. So there's this discretion and there's this justification, and within that justification, there's a range of escalation and de-escalation that can be exercised that is considered justified by the officer. And where I see racism express is when you start to look at overall numbers as opposed to individual situations, right? So there's like this idea of, like you talked before about implicit bias. So there's the bias that we express that we don't even realize we're expressing. And then there's overt bias, there's overt racism, there's overt aggression that is more easy to see. So it's easy to see somebody burning a cross, but it's a little bit harder to see when somebody doesn't hire you because you're Black. You kind of have to look at the hiring practices. Like you were saying, you have to go and start looking at the figures in order to see, does this company have a trend of racism? And as I noted earlier, I don't look at policing as uniquely separated from the society when it comes to racism. I see that the society itself has a bias, has racist bias. And so it does not shock me at all to see those same sorts of statistics when it comes to how suspects are handled with policing or with even judgments, right? Like when you're looking at incarcerations, when you're looking at arrests, when you're looking at length of sentence, things like that. You just see this kind of disparity that shows up in the statistics all through the justice system because it shows up all through the society. So while I'm interested in kind of looking at the case, I do want to make it clear that in my view, the concept of racism, when it applies to these systems, goes beyond an individual situation, because the discretion that's available in those situations makes justified overall trends that can still be racist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I'm following. Yes.
Okay. So in this particular case, I'm just going to check the box here that is unarmed. Okay, I mean, that's one that just sort of, in this case, it's a given. This is one of those cases where the suspect is unarmed. And I do understand that that's not always the be all and end all of an interaction. He gets pulled over for the license. He gets out of the car, which is not really standard. So a cop pulls you over, you don't normally get out of your car, but he gets out of the car and the cop tells him, don't get out of the car, right? Like, get back in your vehicle. It starts to become clear that there's a language barrier here. Even though he does ask, do you speak English? And even though Patrick says, yes, I do, or just yes, basically, we know that there's a little bit of a disconnect because the officer asked. That's not a normal thing to ask somebody. When I get pulled, I've been pulled over by police before and gotten tickets, and I've never had them ask me, do you speak English? So for the officer to even ask that shows that we have a communication issue, and the cop recognizes that despite the fact that the guy is saying, yes, I speak English, the cop understands that there's a little bit of a language barrier. So he asked for the license, and Patrick tells his passenger, can you get my license? There's a little bit of an interaction where they try to get the license, where he's telling him where it is, and the passenger is not producing the license. So Patrick turns his back to the officer and starts to walk around the car. And that's when the officer says, wait, don't go away, don't walk away. And then you start to get more into a little bit of a tussle. And what was interesting is, when I mentioned this to you initially, the very first thing you said was the officer called for backup and then engaged. So the things that I was looking at were basically from the point of view of what Patrick was doing, but you immediately focused on what the officer had done. What made you focus on that?
Well, I think that we're living in a day and time where de-escalation is the name of the game. And so if things aren't going well, unless there is an immediate threat, there's no reason to push the issue. If you're having a trouble, maybe, I don't know how big Grand Rapids Police Department is. Off the top of my head, I don't know. But do you have someone who can speak his language? Is there maybe you can, the passenger in the car can help translate? You want to try to control the situation without putting hands on and making things worse. And that's kind of where my mind was going. What did the officer do that he or she could have done different? In this case, what did he do that he could have done differently that could have had a different outcome? And I think that calling for backup was a good idea, but maybe just not engage and wait for that backup to get there before you start anything. Just I think that's the way that could have been approached.
Okay, I mean, I think I would agree. I don't know, I'm not sure when or what prompts a call for backup, but if you do call for backup, it makes sense that you would wait for the backup before you would proceed. I mean, I think that makes sense.
Sure. So backup is usually called when an officer recognizes that this isn't going quite according to the book, right? To the standard playbook here, right? I have someone who's getting out of the car. We're having trouble communicating. He's turning his back, not listening to my commands. These are telltale signs that officers will listen to, look out for, whether someone is plotting to harm them, and this is the way we're trained. With someone's plotting to harm them, looking for escape routes, going to run away, things along those lines. So I don't blame the officer at all for having his antenna up from these non-compliant behaviors. And so he recognized that, and he did something about it, which he should have done, which is, hey, get me some help here, right? I'm outnumbered. There's another person in the car, and this person isn't following directions, commands. Let's get some help here, and I think that was the right thing to do. So
when I watched the videos, I saw throughout the entire thing that Patrick was putting up with what I had described in the protest hypothetical as passive resistance. You expounded a little bit on that to talk about that there's like labeling for types of resistance, and that this might be considered aggression depending on where you are. If you're pushing away the officer's weapon, even though it may be understandable, it still also is illegal, and the officer has a right to use force in certain situations, and a citizen has to kind of legally accept that to reasonable degrees, and that it could be categorized as an aggressive behavior when he starts to actually push away the force from the officer. And so that part I do understand. So I would sort of reframe, I guess, or relabel what I'm trying to describe, which is that I never saw Patrick like take a swing at the officer, grab the officer's throat, like basically attack the officer with an intent to harm, or in a way that looked like he was going after this officer, trying to harm the officer. There was a whole lot of resisting, and there was that defensive pushback that I understand, it may not have been legal depending on whether or not the officer was justified in using the force that he was using. But what it seemed to boil down to me, and what I kept hearing, was if the officer feels like there's a threat of harm, if the officer feels like there's a threat to his life, that he could be injured here. And it just seemed to me like everything I was seeing was that there was no signal from this particular person that they were even desirous to do harm to this officer.
yeah, so here's where it gets complex. So what you're seeing, and I'm not disagreeing with what you're seeing or what you're interpreting from it. Police officers are trained to take persons into custody, and if it's a non-compliant person who is telling you no, and by telling you, I mean either verbally saying it or physically saying it. If they're saying, I'm not going to be arrested, tensing up my arms, I'm saying no, no type of behaviors, then you have to be on the lookout for these types of warning signs and behavior. And so once I've given you these no's, you have to take it up to the next level. So he is a no person who's not responding. He's not responding the way you want him to. He's not compliant. And now he's pushing your hand away with the taser in it. The possibility, and again, this is all training, the possibility that someone could go from pushing your hand away to snatching it from your hand and then using it against you is extremely high. And police officers are trained not to take those types of chances. You're not going to let anyone take anything that that they have on their utility belt, be it their taser, their pepper spray, their baton, or their firearm, even their handcuffs. You're not going to let anyone take those things, because those things can be used against you. So yes, while it may not have looked as though or may not have appeared as though this person was doing anything like that at that time, he was just trying to get away. Officers are trained to understand that if he's just trying to do this now, at an instant, he could turn around, try to swing at me, take that taser, use it against me. And so therefore that becomes the difficulty that we're having right now in these discussions about police reform and what it means to escalate, de-escalate. So should officers continue to receive this type of training when someone is just in this place? Um, we don't know. Police officers will say this, they'll say that. There are people on both sides of the spectrum saying, yes, we should continue to train. No, we should not continue to train this way. A police officer has a right to go home to their family. They want to see their kids again, all that kind of stuff. And they don't want these weapons from a seemingly passive person who's just trying to escape, just trying to run away or not be arrested, to turn around and then have those things used against them because the officer was too soft in their approach and in their attempts to take them into custody. So therefore, this is where we're at. This becomes the absolute amount of difficulty that we're having in these discussions so much. And I would agree with you based on what you saw. And let me say, not that I agree with you. I understand what you're saying. Based on what you saw, does this really rise to the level of the use of lethal force? And that's a good question. And I don't know. And we're gonna have to talk to this officer. They're going to do inquiries. Other experts are going to have to weigh in on this. Everyone's going to have to weigh in on us and say, what's the best practice to do in these circumstances? Should we let people escape? Should we let them run away? If someone grabs our taser, should we not go to the gun as next? Because that can be used against us in incapacitation, right? So all of this type of thing is things that experts are really going to have to really try to hone in on and try to understand. And this becomes a difficulty. So I agree with you that from surface, it doesn't look that way. But the way that officers are trained is that situation is a no, can easily turn into a more aggressive situation later on.
Okay, and so the interaction proceeds and it ends up in a situation where the officer gets Patrick on the ground. And I think anybody who has had the steel to watch the video to the end will see that you have a prone position, Patrick on the ground, hands on the ground, pushing up, almost like a push-up, face down, with the officer on top, a knee in the back. The officer pulls his gun, puts it to the back of the head, and pulls the trigger. I personally was shocked at that. I mean, did you?
I was shocked. I was shocked too. I mean, besides the fact that I knew that it was coming,
Right.
I listen. I've been in those situations. I believe I would imagine that most police officers have been in that situation. I can't see pulling the trigger. I can't see taking my gun out. I can't see taking my taser out. And listen, everybody's fighting skills. There's another thing that comes into the play with the training is the size of the officer. I'm not a tall guy. I'm only 5'7". So the size of the officer, his muscular build, male, female, the size of the suspect, all these types of things are weighed in, and they'll be taken into consideration by a jury, by the defense, by during the court proceedings. All this will have to be weighed in. But I can't see in a situation taking my taser out and using it in that situation. I can't see taking my firearm out and using it in that situation. I just can't. I can't see it. Now, a lot of explanations will go on. Other experts will go on. Will be chiming in on this. It's shocking, and I can't understand. I can't understand his thought process in doing that. I can't understand. I'm curious to know as to why he did what he did, why he engaged when he had backup coming, why he took his taser out when you're in close proximity like that. I'm sure that his training would say your taser is a weapon that should be used to in certain circumstances. It should not be an active situation where we're both hands on and I need to control you. I can't understand that. So
Okay, and that's pretty much the interaction part of the conversation, but it brought me to another issue that might touch on some of your thoughts about reform, because I couldn't help but wonder how this could play out so similarly with somebody who was having a mental health crisis, with somebody who is deaf, with somebody who is not neurotypical, like a person with autism. There are so many issues that could have a person experiencing communication difficulties with an officer that might, in another context, be better handled. Like in this case, you were saying might have been better handled by someone who could interpret, even if the passenger had been involved and could talk to him a little bit more clearly. This could have, a lot of this might have been mitigated. And so I'm wondering, what if the person was having a mental health crisis? What if they were deaf and they turn their back on this officer and he's shouting commands at them and they don't even know it? What if the person is autistic and not understanding, the way that these commands are being shouted and, is getting confused? I mean, from a reform aspect, what are your thoughts?
From a reform aspect, it's incumbent upon police departments to do the work and to do the training. My department was very good at making sure that we trained our officers on exactly what you mentioned: autistic persons, persons who are deaf, and things along those lines. We have to get up to speed with our training. And if the officer would have encountered someone who's deaf, dumb, mute, and suffering from a mental health breakdown or any of those things, they have got to be able to recognize those types of things and respond accordingly. And so we've got to catch up on the training. We've got to catch up on the training, understand what's going on, work with psychologists, sociologists, work with deaf schools, et cetera, work with autistic charities. We've got to work with these individuals in order to stop these types of things from happening. And I think another thing too is we've got to get it's got to become almost institutional within training academies, within driving academies, to teach individuals how to respond, what to do when confronting an officer. Now, I don't know what the case is with this particular individual, but it doesn't seem to me. Well, I don't want to speculate. It just doesn't seem to me that his lack of cooperation was unintentional. No matter where he came from, the police are the police. I mean, I've been to foreign countries. If police officers start talking to me, even if they're talking a complete language that I don't understand, I'm going to respond in a certain way. My hands are up. Listen, I don't know what's going on. So I don't know, what he's going through. He could have been having a mental breakdown. He could have been in a hurry. All this type of things will be ironed out. But it seems to me as if that was not unintentional. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely there was resistance. I don't think that was something he wasn't aware that he was doing. I think he knew that he was resisting. As we've already discussed, I just didn't see him as a person intent on hurting anybody.
Yeah. No, I agree. Again, officers are trained to, yes, he's not hurting me right now, but he could. And it's difficult to, and this is why I put so much onus on the police officers in their accountability and training, and understanding what we're doing. Citizens are going to have these different issues that we talked about, being deaf and mute and suffering from whatever circumstances. It's up to the police to remain calm, to de-escalate when possible, and to employ other techniques and methods. And he had one. He called for backup. Why? I can't understand why he continued to engage. I can't understand it. So,
Okay, and I just have one point that I thought of as far as ending this. We had a conversation before, and I can't remember exactly what I said, and I won't lie, I didn't go back and re-listen to it to see what prompted it. But we had talked before, and I think it was during the Floyd conversation. And that incident happened in May 2020. And Chauvin was convicted. He's appealing. The other officers on the scene that held the line against the citizens who had gathered there were all found guilty in February on all charges. And that included depriving Floyd of his civil rights and failing to render medical aid. And two of the officers were also convicted of not intervening to stop Chauvin with the excessive use of force. And I had made some comment during that conversation. I can't remember what I had said, but it had to do with the future, and maybe having you back on or something. And you said you hoped that we wouldn't be having these same conversations 5 years from now. You were just like, I certainly hope we're not going to be, having this conversation. And I'm wondering, since 2020, May 2020, we're almost 2 years out now. Have you seen any sort of reforms since Floyd that give you hope that there's a future for reimagining policing?
Yeah, I've seen a number of states who are trying to get these things under control, banning chokeholds, requiring de-escalation training, requiring the use of body cameras. That's going on in Connecticut, where I think by 2023, all departments within the state have to have body cameras. De-escalation training is now part of it. I continue to teach at the Waterbury Police Academy. I teach the history of policing up to the civil rights movement. I teach procedural justice. Those are two classes that I'm teaching even in retirement. Connecticut also has established an independent inspector general's department, where if there's an off-duty shooting, or there's a police involved shooting, that it will be investigated by them rather than the local district attorney. Before then, even if different counties in Connecticut are different, what we call jurisdictions, geographical areas. And so if you say you're GA1 where the shooting happened, and no one from that investigative office could investigate it, but it had to go to GA4 or 5 or something, someplace across the state where it was try to maintain some semblance of a disinterested, independent investigation. So there's a lot of things going along those lines. More duty to report by different departments across the country. I mentioned use of force. They're trying to define what use of force can be used in certain circumstances. I think California was very instrumental in saying in their language, saying something along the lines of that not a reasonable standard, but justifiable standard. I think that's the verbiage that they're using, right? So in other words, if you're a police officer out in California, before you pull that trigger, you have to have exhausted every single measure to know that this person was an actual threat rather than a reasonable standard. The reasonable standard was what would another police officer, given the same set of same circumstances, what would they have done in that similar set of circumstances? So that's been the talk around the country. California has changed that. And I think there's a couple of other states who are looking into that. As I mentioned, de-escalation training, no more consent traffic stops. So if you could stop the traffic stop in Connecticut, and the officer says, hey, listen, the traffic stop is concluded. However, you mind if I search your vehicle? Can't do that anymore unless the officer has reasonable suspicion and or probable cause. In some states, in some jurisdictions, are no longer accepting military equipment from the military, equipment from the military. So these are different types of reforms that people are doing to try to address these types of things. A lot more training about implicit bias and de-escalation training. As I mentioned, I'm teaching history of policing, so I'm trying to get to the nuts and bolts of how we got to this situation. We started off this conversation as to, a black officer or a white officer who doesn't like black people, essentially, and he's pulling people over and just behaving along these lines. Why does that persist? Why is society, as you mentioned, this is a reflection of society, right? The police departments are often a microcosm of society. So why is this happening? What has caused all this, in 2022 or 2020 with George Floyd, 2022, why are we still wrestling with this? Well, I break it down from the inception of slave patrols to the night watchmen in the North. All these were racist groups. And so I break it down to the history and all that. So I think that that some departments in some states are really trying to undo the damage that has been done. So I am optimistic that a lot of things are changing and will change. And but we just have to keep pushing for these types of changes, keep having these conversations. I think, unfortunately, this is another situation. This particular case is another situation wherein we're going to have to continue to ask for these conversations and see what could have been done. If this is California, they're going to have to ask a question: what could have been done? You called for backup. Why didn't you wait? Why did you take your taser out? Why not just hold the guy down and wait for your backup to arrive? You could hear the sirens. Why are you doing this? So these are questions that we have to answer and we have to be honest about and try to really try to get to the root of. And I hope that we don't have and won't have these types of situations anymore. But officers have to be smarter in what they're doing. They have to be. They have to be.
You mentioned a couple things that actually made me think of more things.
Sure.
So during the altercation, the body cam actually went off. And the official story was that it was whatever pressure is required to turn off a body camera was triggered during body contact with the suspect, right, with Patrick. So I guess I thought that was kind of interesting because the body cam would be most necessary during a physical interaction, right? I mean, like you said, it's these kind of force abuse situations, these sort of, uncomfortable Floyd situations that have actually triggered things like body cameras. So when we're looking at a situation where there's this altercation happening and you're in close proximity and you're struggling with somebody that you've pulled over and the body cam gets tapped and goes off, that just seems, I mean, I'm not saying that the officer turned it off and that there's something nefarious going on. I'm saying, shouldn't a body cam be built in a way that, a struggle doesn't turn it off?
Well, I mean, I would imagine that would be the goal, but the different mechanisms that go on during a fight, the different things that can happen. You can be on the ground and a pebble will hit that button. So it's possible. I'm sure that a review of this should be going to the body cam company to see how we can prevent that from going on, prevent this from happening again. But yeah, I would imagine that that there are systems in place that would stop that, and a review would go on to make sure that it doesn't happen again.
The other thing that you mentioned that made me think was, I believe we had talked before about, you had mentioned the fact that, I can't remember if it was police shootings or police killings, when that we don't really keep a record of it, that there's not like a database of it. Was that?
Yeah, that's been a problem. I believe the Washington Post and maybe a few college professors are keeping records of those, but there's no FBI statistics on how many persons are killed by the police. There's over 18,000 police departments within the United States, and all of them do not report all their information, and not just killings, but I mean robberies and other things like that. They don't all report to the FBI or to the government their statistics. So it's difficult to know. And every time we talk about this, we're always talking about estimates. I believe that was in the Tim Scott's when he was trying to get something done on a national level. I believe that was part of his package, was to let's figure out how many officers are being assaulted, how many times we're pulling the trigger, what other methods, and we just don't know. So these are all estimates that are given, and even the estimates that are collected by college professors and by the Washington Post are still just estimates. This is the best we can do. So.
And is that based on voluntary reported data from departments?
Correct. It's voluntarily reported data. Now, if a department wants to become accredited through a CALIA standard, It clearly is an acronym. Then the exact name escapes me right now, but it's a national standard for police departments that want to become accredited in, or you consider reputable. So they would be required to report, but every police department is not seeking accreditation, which costs money. And so therefore it's an issue that we're having as far as knowing exactly what's going on with how many traffic stops are being performed, how many tickets are being given out, how many people are complaining about racial profiling, how much another big one is how much hate crime is actually going on, right? If a city doesn't report their hate crime statistics, we don't know how many hate crimes are occurring nationally. We don't know. So this is a problem. This is a problem.
Well, I just want to thank you so much. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add?
Uh, I, I would like to, I don't want to sound like that particular person, that guy, but I think that I've always advocated for more training, better training for police officers, and I'm never going to stop advocating for that. But I would like to say that, listen, in situations like this, when and if you find yourself uh, in a situation where you're being confronted by a police officer, just comply. Comply now, complain later. Do what you have to do in order to go home to your family, survive contact. If you don't like the way that they talk to you, don't think that ticket was fair, think you're being racially profiled, think that the cop pulled you over because you're a pretty female, or whatever the case is, um, don't take that opportunity on the side of the road to take justice into your own hand or to resist their actions. Let's just say that this tragic situation didn't play out. At the worst, the other end of it is other officers are going to come, and you're still going to be a violent situation wherein you're more than likely going to suffer an injury. Mr. Lyoya probably would have suffered some type of injury. Um, so it's not worth it. Just comply, deal with the situation later, get a lawyer, and on those lines. So that would be how I would end that.
Okay. I mean, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Can predict already the thought process of some folks who are looking at some of those videos where folks did comply, like reaching for a driver's license and getting shot.
Oh well, listen, I'm not going to excuse that kind of craziness. I mean, yes, reaching for wallets and cell phones and driver's licenses. I've seen those videos as well, and these trigger happy police officers who are doing these types of things, who are scared because of the environment, scared because of the streets that they're policing, scared because of the color of the persons. I've seen a few, one in particular in South Carolina, where the officer was arrested, a few days later and convicted. So yes, it's not a guarantee. And listen, I'm a black man living in America too. And if I ever get pulled over, I'm going to have my heart's going to be racing as well, because I don't know where this officer is or where he comes from or where his mindset is and his affiliations and all that. So I get it that we want to be able to reach for cell phones and things along those lines. And as far as that, tell the officer, listen, I'll get my license, but it's in my glove compartment, sir. It's in my back pocket. I'm just going to reach for it now. Hands where you can see them, and things along those lines. I understand that there is a thought process to it. What I'm trying to do is give people a mindset of how to stay safe, how to make sure that the officer feels comfortable if you talk to him or her and tell them this is where this is, and I'm going to reach for it now. I think that these are techniques that we can all use to make sure that we all go home.
All right. Well, I do appreciate your time, and you're always so ready to talk to me, and I can't thank you enough for just your willingness to come on and discuss these difficult issues.
Anytime you want me, I'll be here for you. I appreciate it.
All right. You have a good night.
Okay. Police reform is more than just a trending topic. My name is Lawrence Hunter. I'm a retired police captain from the state of Connecticut, and I've written a new book called Police Reform. And I talk about the evolution of law enforcement here in America and what changes need to be made in order to improve the relationship between the police and the communities that they serve. Over the past few months, it has become increasingly more important and more evident that there's something amiss and awry between the police and the communities that they serve. So whether you're about defunding the police or defending the police, if you're about Blue Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter, no matter what side of the fence you happen to sit on, make sure that you pick up your copy of Police Reform today.